Hello everyone, Richard Lewis here with another video, and this one is going to be something that I've not done before. I'm going to be addressing a community I haven't produced any content for as of yet. I'm going to be talking about Overwatch, specifically the big announcement at BlizzCon about the new Overwatch League. Now, I imagine if you're a fan of Overwatch that it might be your first esport. It is quite new, and it's definitely got a lot of new players, about 20 million by Blizzard's own estimation. And some of you might never have followed an esport before and certainly wonder who the fuck this old bald man on this YouTube video is. So I guess it's appropriate to introduce myself to you if you're new. My name is Richard Lewis. I've been a journalist for over a decade. I've focused on esports for a very long time. I've worked for companies as a journalist, but also kind of in the marketing and promotional aspect of esports. I've ran organizations myself. I've held my own teams, my own organization, and I guess recently I'm kind of known as being a bit of an iconoclastic guy who wrote articles about corruption in esports, exposing things like match fixing, this kind of thing, mistreatment of players. I've also done hosting. I've done a lot of broadcasting as well. I was on a popular show called Unfiltered. I also did another show called Climbing the Ladder. I did a show with Thorin called By the Numbers. So I've been around quite a bit. And now currently I work for Turner Sports, where I'm their host of the TV show E-League, which is aired on TBS. And I saw the announcement about the Overwatch League, and why I felt it was important to make a video about it was incredibly similar to a failed esports venture called CGS. And again, even you might have heard this mentioned in the aftermath of the video at BlizzCon. Now, I'm going to give you a brief reminder of what the Championship Gaming Series was, but I'm also going to tell you that I worked at CGS. I started out as a features writer, and then I became the head for European coverage, and then we parted ways very acrimoniously over some extreme conflicts of interests about conduct and what constitutes reporting and content. So the Championship Gaming Series was basically one of the early attempts to televise and make mainstream esports competitive gaming. And it came around in 2006, which it started with a proof of concept thing called CGI, the Championship Gaming Invitational, that was limited to North America, and it did have several people who went on to be in the CGS. The official founding of the league was in 2007. It was funded by one of the Murdochs to the tune of about 60 million. It was meant to have a 5-year plan for success. It was broadcast on DirecTV and B-Sky B and Star TV. And even though the league was only founded in 2007, it burnt out incredibly quick, and it was gone by 2008. Now, what happened was there was a lot of people in esports who, from the early turn of the century, had been working incredibly hard, and it wasn't profitable, and it was very niche. And this was one of the first real attempts by a mainstream media outlet, by anyone with mainstream money, to come into the space and basically buy up all of the properties and create something that could be marketable and would go on to have a future as a piece of television content or as a sports league. Everybody had this feeling it was going to get big, and what people were trying to do was get ahead of that curve, so you effectively owned the broadcasting rights to the sports, and then you could sell them to subsidiaries and syndicated partners and that kind of thing. Now, unfortunately, Championship Gaming Series was a sewer of corruption. It was awful. You'll see a lot of people who used to work for CGS who will talk about all the great things it achieved, and it's a very interesting landmark in esports history, absolutely. It did get us on TV. It did help propel us a little bit further to the mainstream, but generally it was bad. It did a lot of things that it took years to recover from, and keep in mind, in 2009, we had the global recession, and that completely shrunk away marketing budgets. So we were dealing with the aftermath of CGS, and we were dealing with a global recession at the same time. And it did set esports back years because it broke apart teams. It created divisions in games artificially. It created really artificial expectations by overpaying everybody. So when it collapsed, everybody was like, hang on, I've gone from being paid a living salary to now I can't even get a basic sponsorship because of the global recession. And a lot of people retired. A lot of people thought it was over. A lot of people thought the esports dream was bust. And basically it left a huge gaping hole in esports. For these reasons, I'm always inclined to believe that CGS is a failure. People will still shill for it today. I took their money. I was complicit in lying to the community and presenting a false idea about what CGS was about. After doing that, I kind of vowed I was never going to do it again. I was going to uphold myself to a higher standard. And that's what I've tried to do in esports. I make no bones about it. I admit it. I took the money. I was really overpaid for what I did. And I was a vocal proponent of CGS, even though I could see the bad things that it was doing. So let's talk about how this compares to the Overwatch video and why people are saying there's similarities to this CGS. So what I'm going to do is we're going to play the video in two halves. We're going to play the first minute and 45 seconds or so of the video, and then I'm going to break down some of the points. Then we're going to play the second half, and I'll break down those points as well. So roll it, Sam.
Soldiers, scientists, adventurers, oddities. Over 20 million players have started their watch. Now we want to showcase the world's greatest Overwatch players. Blizzard Entertainment is proud to announce the Overwatch League, a global world-class esport league designed from the ground up to celebrate the best of the best on their path to victory. Our seasoned experience in esports and the best practices of time-honored traditional sports help to define the unique structure of the Overwatch League. Our goal is to create the world's premier esport league, where teams and players can thrive for years to come, and fans are made for life. Let's break it down. Each team in the Overwatch League will represent a major city. Our plan is to expand the league over time to include additional teams from the Americas, Europe, China, Korea, and the Asia-Pacific region. A global league of the future ensures that fans in every corner of the world will have a professional team to root for and will be able to witness Overwatch played at the highest level. The owners of each team will take an active role in developing their players, internal structures, and team roles. League players can become the most decorated Overwatch professional competitors in the world when team owners and players share in league economics. Stability is a key factor in making this happen. So once prospective team owners have bid for their location and successfully joined, teams will have a guaranteed place in the league. While team stability is paramount, player stability is equally important. So each player will have a contract, including compensation and benefits.
Okay, so let's address some of the points and some of the key similarities. And I also want to stress, because this is a video that is designed to critique, it may seem like I'm being overly negative. But overall, I want to say that this, could very well be a good thing for esports. It certainly has the scope and the scale. Certainly, there are some people affiliated with it who I believe to be competent and more than competent when it comes to working in esports. But for the purposes of critique and comparison, I am going to focus mainly on some of the issues. I hope that doesn't make it look like I'm being overly negative. That's not my intention. It's just the nature of this video. So first of all, Blizzard say our seasoned experience in esports, and there's no doubt they do have a seasoned experience in esports, but it hasn't always been positive. I think if people want to go and look at their history, obviously I don't think esports was something Blizzard were primarily concerned about for a very long period of time. And certainly with the popularity of Brood War, StarCraft, the original StarCraft, Brood War being the expansion, it kind of felt that they did defer a lot to, Kesper in the Korean region. Everybody who works in esports today, everybody who has a position in esports, everyone who cares about esports, we all owe StarCraft a huge debt. But I've talked about this a lot. Actually, what happened with StarCraft was it was a perfect storm. The success really couldn't be replicated. I've written many articles about this. Feel free to search them out. But just give you a brief summary about what was happening in Korea. You first of all had a government that was committed to providing incredible levels of tech regarding the internet, so broadband and high-speed connections. They themselves had a financial collapse, and what this meant was one of the businesses that were very cost-effective to run were PC bangs, which is why they had such a proliferation throughout South Korea of this particular type of business. You also had the fact that due to some kind of old grudges with Japan, consoles came at an incredibly high with an incredibly high tax. So only the super wealthy could really afford to have Nintendo or Sega in South Korea, and this meant PC was the preferred, method of play. It was what people used, and also as well because of the financial collapse at the time when this was available, they needed cheap television, and what was cheap television was certainly to show people playing StarCraft, to show hours and hours of it. There were multiple channels dedicated to it, and this, along with many other factors, created a perfect storm where StarCraft really rose to prominence. We get the birth of Kesper, and we have this professional league. Now, of course, that wasn't without its problems. We all know how Brood War died. It died due to match fixing. And I kind of feel that it was a bit of a runaway beast, ultimately. It was hugely successful, hugely inspirational, a touchstone for anyone who works in esports. But ultimately, I think Blizzard were kind of hands-off and perhaps to the detriment of the game. Perhaps they had to be. A lot of people do know that working with Kesper can be incredibly difficult. If you want to have presence in South Korea, you certainly have to appease Kesper, and they carry a lot of influence and a lot of power. So I'm almost sympathetic towards Blizzard in that sense. On top of that, I think if we look at some of the other games they've produced, they've had some hits and some misses, and they've had some, Hearthstone, for example, which has gone on to be one of their bigger esports. That's kind of been accidentally successful, if you like. I don't think anybody could have predicted its success as an esports title, and certainly it lacked key features, and still does really, for what you would consider essential, for an esports game. And the early days of broadcasting it on Twitch and stuff were incredibly difficult. Heroes of the Storm, I remember having conversations with Blizzard employees. I used to be, pretty well liked and well regarded by Blizzard. I'm not too sure if that's changed. I have no idea. But certainly, I've had conversations with many Blizzard employees down the years, and they were incredibly optimistic about Heroes of the Storm. They said, we've got big plans for it. We're going to create, something very special with it, we think, and we feel it'll endure. And I was very skeptical. I said, actually, you're coming into a very crowded MOBA market a little bit late. And unless you have an incredible polished product and something that's identifiable and fun, that you're going to really struggle. And I feel a little bit vindicated to that view because of what happened with Heroes of the Storm. And again, remember, I hosted a Heroes of the Storm event when I was working freelance for DreamHack. And it's not that I have anything against the game. I think it has some fundamental design choices that, for me, ultimately prevented it being a bigger esport than what it's gone on to be. And I think perhaps it was a little bit of hyperbole when I called it a commercial failure. The people who enjoy it obviously enjoy it, but certainly I think, having known the high hopes that Blizzard had for it, I think it kind of did fall a little bit short of what they would have liked. And then, of course, obviously, you've got the WCS in StarCraft. Now, it took a long time for them to get a format that really worked. And while I was kind of pleased with how WCS looked towards the end when they finally implemented everything, it did come a little bit too late. And I think we've all seen the decline in StarCraft 2, which, again, was another game that really propelled esports into the mainstream consciousness. So what you've got here when they talk about their seasoned experience in esports is you've kind of got the good and the bad. They've produced some incredible games which have literally pioneered esports and how we do things, but they've always ended in kind of ignominy. They've always kind of tailored off, and they don't always have a happy ending. Or sometimes they create a game and they overlook something that's very important from an esports perspective. And it's almost successful despite itself. Now, none of that's a criticism of Blizzard. There are certainly far worse games developers when it comes to understanding the mechanics of esports. But there you go. I think that's a fair critique of when they talk about seasoned experience. It's not all good. I mean, certainly you do learn from your mistakes. But let's just continue and look at the next part. They say each team will represent a major city. Now, this happened in CGS as well, and I remember being sat in meetings about how great this was going to be because, you would have one of the great things about sports is you identify locally with a team. You have some geographical or regional affiliation to a team. And this is what they did. They either bought existing brands and assigned them to a city, or they invented brands that were geographically based. So, for example, in the UK, we had Birmingham Salvo and the London Mint. It was LA Complexity, San Francisco Optics, Carolina Core. This was the idea. Now, unfortunately, in esports, it's incredibly flawed because it's a virtual game. It exists on the internet. It exists, in cyberspace. There's no boundaries. There's nothing stopping me supporting Cloud9, SK Gaming, Astralis. There's nothing preventing me from supporting these organizations. And by supporting them, I mean I can religiously watch all of their games online, and maybe I will get a chance to attend and see them live, but more often than not, it'll be on the road. It won't be in the home country. And you'll see as well, people who support and follow esports, they have favorite players. And if a team leaves an organization and moves somewhere else, people go with the team. Look at Luminosity and SK Gaming. The Brazilian fans have kind of gone with them. And that's just how it is. I mean, that's a factor when you invest into something. Now, I wonder, I don't know if Blizzard have accounted for this, but how it would work, for example, let's take two cities at random. Let's make them British again. In fact, let's make it Birmingham and London, like in CGS. Let's say the team from London moved to Birmingham in its entirety, the full lineup, or even just one or two of the star players were acquired in an off-season. A large chunk of the fans from London would probably, as is the trend in esports, now suddenly support Birmingham. And that creates this geographical divide. This is very common in esports. I think maybe Blizzard are hoping they can be instrumental in changing that attitude. And I agree. I think that might be a positive thing if the attitude would change. But I think based on what I know about esports, I think it's highly unlikely, honestly. The other thing as well is it's very exclusionary because, and this is just my opinion, maybe you disagree, but if you say this team is associated with this major city and I live in a not so major city, let's say Manchester, for example, didn't have a franchise and I lived in Manchester, but London and Birmingham do. Well, who do I support and when do we get our team and how does it work? And you're creating a choice that ultimately renders the whole exercise meaningless because there's no guarantee. I mean, like people from Manchester don't have any particular affinity to people from the Midlands, and certainly not from the South in London. So I'd be just as well off supporting an American team or a Korean team or a Chinese team. I may as well. It makes no difference from a geographical perspective. So I do find it bizarre in that sense that the idea is that people will geographically just immediately go, oh, well, I am 45 minutes drive away from London, but I'm 90 minutes drive away from Birmingham. I go with the one that's close. It seems a bit odd. And just as well, just as an aside, the Championship Gaming Series tried to expand into regions that were just out of their control, that were just like some Wild West bullshit. Say what you will about Kesper, at least they had everything on lockdown to a certain degree in South Korea. But when you start expanding into other regions, it just becomes a shit show. There was a bunch of franchises that never really saw the light of day. The most notable one, the most notorious, was Dubai Mirage. And it was this idea of, having a team in Dubai and expanding into these Emirati regions, where obviously there's lots of money potentially if you can persuade people to part with it. And it didn't really work out. That franchise was hushed up and it's never spoke of to this day. And that's another danger, that there will be regions where there isn't an esports infrastructure. There will be parts of the world where there isn't an esports infrastructure, and you will get chances and corrupt people and incompetent people look to quickly fill that void. So you would need to literally try and put infrastructure in to a region before expanding into it. I've talked a lot in past videos about how Brazil and indeed South America is, for me, the next area that esports is really going to see the big boom in. And again, I've been vindicated because we've been getting more and more teams and more legitimate sponsors coming out of Brazil and now Argentina and now Colombia and now Chile. And it's happening. It's slowly but surely happening. But again, there is still financial corruption. There is still a lack of infrastructure. And if Blizzard want to have teams in these regions, Blizzard are going to unfortunately going to have to go in there and clean house and put people in place. And I think it's going to be a massive undertaking and no guarantee that it would succeed. And I think that's something to be mindful of before you expand. I would definitely say on a venture like this, you'd be a lot better off starting small. Now, the other thing that they talked about, which was a little bit vague and a little bit strange to me. Owners will take an active role in developing players, internal structures, and team roles. And I guess what that means is they will have complete control over the franchise on an operational basis. But obviously, that's still going to be beholden to Blizzard. So just again, for the CGS comparison, as that's the point of the video, what happened there was the general manager of an organization was appointed by CGS. They were paid by CGS, and they ran a franchise for CGS for that salary. They were allowed to go and get their own sponsors. They were allowed to make hires, but for each hire they made, CGS had final decision over whether you could hire them. When I became persona non grata and CGS tried to drive me out of the industry because it's something I wrote, I wasn't allowed to work for Carolina Core. I was very good friends with Mark Dolvan. He wanted to employ me. He was told he absolutely couldn't. In fact, they went so far as to try and have me removed as a volunteer from a website I wrote for free, because they were a press partner. So there are some issues with that. I mean, you know, if I was an owner of a franchise, I would want complete dominion over how that franchise operates. And I'm not saying Blizzard are going to operate in the same way CGS did, but I think there needs to be some more clarification publicly about what developing players, controlling internal structure, and controlling team roles means. I think we need to know what that means. Also, as well, it talks about the bidding. And this means there's an auction, right? And I'm going to tell you now about some of the issues around the auction. And I've heard this from several team owners who've come to me and told me this, and some of them are not very happy. First of all, that apparently the plan is to buy out existing teams. So if you've got a team and it's been successful, Blizzard are going to buy you out of their contracts, and that is a prerequisite if you want to be in this league, because they want to have a big combine, a draft, where people draft players. So existing teams have to be broken apart. And this is, again, what the CGS did. It broke existing teams apart, and it did take a special form of pleasure in doing it to the teams that didn't want to toe the line. Fnatic, for example, had the best Counter-Strike source team in the world at the time, and they didn't want to sell the Fnatic brand to CGS, so their team got broke apart and weren't allowed to compete as a five, and it was a real tragedy, honestly, for the game. But basically, so what they're doing is they said to owners, don't lock players in. And I almost feel that would benefit Blizzard ultimately to say that to owners, because then they don't have to buy them out. And I think that's a little bit, iffy to me, speaking honestly about it. But maybe that's because they're going to get some reward if they don't, or, I don't know what the inducement's going to be. But here's the important thing. They're going to pay and buy out those players from their contracts, and then they're going to be available to draft. But the endemic esports organizations are going to go to this auction where they've invited something like 30 30 top sports franchises. So existing sports franchises, I'm going to just throw some names out there, but for example, it might be an LA Lakers, it could be a Miami Dolphins, it could be anyone. And the endemic esports organizations are literally going to have to bid alongside these people for franchises. Well, we don't have that spending power. So what does that mean? I imagine it means that the franchises that genuinely want to get into esports and want to buy, a team for their city, well, they'll just get it. And the endemic esports organizations might not get a city that's close, might not get a desirable city, a city with esports fans. They're going to literally have to bid against companies with spending power of hundreds of millions, which to me seems a little bit unfair, and it doesn't help the endemics. It doesn't help the people that have helped build esports up to this level. So I hope there's some sort of special, as I said, inducement or reward or assistance to ensure that the endemic sponsors don't just get crushed by the mainstream sporting organizations. So I think if that happens, that would be a tragedy. That wouldn't be good for esports, in my opinion. Even though I do welcome all of these new people coming in. I was out there. I talked to Rick Fox. I'm so grateful he's here. He's a great guy. I think he's going to do it right with Echo Fox. Same with the Philly 76ers when they picked up Dignitas. I welcome these people coming into our space, but it can't be at the expense of the people that have got us to this point. The other thing they talk about is team stability. And unfortunately, team stability means no relegations. That's what this is. Now, there's a big cabal, I like to call it, of team owners who have come together in groups. And there's one in Europe and there's one in North America. And what they do is they basically have tried to collectively bargain to leverage leagues to do what is financially beneficial to them. And one of those things is to agree not to have relegation. Now, it's a very Americanized thing in sports. So I'm not going to say that there's any entirely negative outlook to it, that it's entirely bad. But certainly when the League of Legends people were talking about how it was a dark day for esports, when teams got relegated, big teams got relegated. I think it was NRG and it might have been Echo Fox as well, from LCS. People were saying this is a terrible day. This is a really, really bad day. Like, this is going to set us back. And it's like, well, no, because when you're relegated, it's due to not being good enough. It's due to incompetence, mismanagement, not picking up the right players, not dealing with internal problems. And the penalty is you have to then earn your way back into the league. That is terrible for that team. But that loss is tempered by it being someone else's gain. And one of the things I like is that we spread and distribute the wealth through esports, that a new organization might get a chance to build a brand off the back of an LCS spot. That's why I think relegations and promotions are important and need to be a part of esports, because otherwise you're going to create a status quo that will always be at the top, and all the secondary esports organizations, let's say this Overwatch League becomes the best thing ever, then if you're not in that Overwatch League, you are a tier 2 organization by definition. Well, that's a problem. I don't think that's entirely good for the ecosystem of esports. Certainly more money will be coming in, but what's going to happen to the organizations that don't get to the table? How are they going to get to the table? How often are we going to have these auctions? What if, again, the auctions are dominated by mainstream sports outlets? It's a situation that is replete with problems. Anyway, it also says here, players have a contract, which will include compensation and benefits. As a player advocate, I'm incredibly happy about that. LCS, it was recently reported, are moving towards, that's the League of Legends League again, in case Overwatch people aren't aware. They're moving towards now making them official employees. And again, this looks like a very benevolent thing to do, because they've never done that before. And this means they qualify for benefits and holiday and whatever else, and certain rights that they didn't get before. But I think that's to stave off lawsuits and action, rather than riots suddenly having a change of heart, or suddenly the means to do it. So it's good that Blizzard are doing this from the start, but again, it doesn't stipulate who the player contract will be with. And I imagine, based on how very CGS this looks at the moment, I imagine that the contract will be with Blizzard directly. And this needs to be made clear. Are you contracted to the organization, the team owner, the franchise, whatever you want to call it, and they have dominion over you, or are you contracted to Blizzard, and therefore Blizzard can ultimately dictate things that happen in your life, in your career. That's a very important distinction, one that needs to be made clear, and I'm sure it will be in due time. Anyway, let's play out the remainder of the video if we could. Sam, thank you.
Early next year, before season play commences, the Overwatch League will conduct a combine. Invited players will have the opportunity to distinguish themselves as top talent, their stories amplified by editorial content documenting the rise of tomorrow's superstars. The Combine will help ensure that all teams have awareness around the best players. Following the Combine, there will be a signing period where rosters will be finalized. With the team rosters established, the regular season will commence with LAN play in front of live audiences. At the end of the regular season, the top teams will compete face-to-face in front of the fans in the live playoffs. For exclusive content and insider access to teams and players, a comprehensive, feature-rich website will serve as the dedicated online hub for fans, providing access to videos, player profiles, the latest stats, schedules, and more. Our mission is to ensure that the competitors of tomorrow understand the steps they need to take to become a pro. High-ranking placement in competitive play, honing your skills in online leagues, and making a name for yourself in third-party events are all great ways for aspiring pros to increase the odds of receiving an invitation to play in the league. Our hope is to establish the Overwatch League as a professional career path, open to any and all of the world's most competitive players. The world needs legendary heroes and fans to cheer them on in the Overwatch League. Are you with us?
So there you go. So there's the rest of it. Right. So let's jump into the part about the Combine. Now, the Combine CGS had a Combine, and basically what that meant was you had to do a series of exercises, and these were very much played up for the press, very much over exaggerated. There was a piece of software that measured your reaction time, and of course that's not the be all and end all in Counter-Strike. There was certain managers took players and made pickup teams and made them play together. Certain teams, players had noise pumped into their earphones to see how they could concentrate and distract environments. A lot of it was not done for any practical reason. It was done for the showmanship of it all. And I want to add, and this is the one stumbling point I have with a lot of people who worked at CGS. They deny this, even though I was in the room when this was happening. There was large groups of people who were basically talking about how the draft had to go. So at the end of the day, the Combine, it wasn't just, oh, he's good, I'm going to try and draft him. There was this, oh, well, yeah, he's already, that's the only player from Germany, so they have to be part of Berlin Alliance. And we still did days and days of Combine stuff. So I'm always dubious about that. I think it'll be a spectacle. I think, I'll be interested to see what exercises there are to truly measure how good an Overwatch player is. But I almost think a Combine is a little bit gimmicky within an esports context. I could be wrong. Certainly, I think there are player attributes that could be measurable. That might be useful when determining if you're picking up a team or not. But ultimately, I imagine people are going to go into the Combine with a pretty good idea about what kind of players they want. And it's just going to depend on what the limitations are and how the drafting system actually works as to who gets who and what happens. And I imagine Blizzard will want a fairly even distribution of talent. I imagine that's one of the points of the exercise in the first place. Because it would be nice to go into the first season not knowing straight away who's going to win, who's going to dominate. So it also talks about stories amplified by editorial content. Now, I wrote those stories when I was at CGS, and I can tell you it really did skew the meritocracy aspect of it. In fact, those stories were more important in terms of people getting drafted than the Combine was, than any of those results from any of those exercises. And I'm going to tell you why. For example, this is quite a famous story, if you follow my career, I bumped into a dude in the hotel lobby, and I was like, "Are you here for CGS?" Just to make some small talk with him because we were waiting around to get our bags taken up. And he was a Project Gotham racing player, a racing driving player called Neo Jake, and he told me about how he had sold all of his stuff. A load of his like DVD collection, his Xbox, whatever it was, to get a ticket from Ireland and come to this combine to get drafted. He'd left his job at Blockbuster Video. He'd really put it all on the line to have a chance at being a pro salaried gamer. Now, I was running late well, not late, but I was certainly running out of time to file my first feature-length article, so I cobbled together a piece called Neo Jake's Big Sacrifice, which was just literally boiling parts of the conversation I had with this dude in the lobby, and that was the step for me getting promoted immediately on day one. They were like, "Holy shit, this is great," and I was like, "Oh yeah, okay, cool. It's nothing really. I'm a little bit embarrassed to file it. It's not a very good article," but they were like, "This is exactly the kind of story we want." And that was the story that got put into press releases for all the other managers and all the outside mainstream media that were watching CGS, because that's the kind of human interest piece that they wanted. And I think that's fine. I have no problem with human interest. But when Neo Jake did get drafted, he was drafted on the basis of that article. I mean, that's not a lie. He flopped terribly in the final race and was incredibly despondent and emotional. I remember it well. But he was drafted on the basis that this guy who he'd used as the flagship for the sacrifices that gamers have to make, he had to be drafted. The story had to have that happy ending, or it wasn't complete. And that's why when I hear about this editorial content, I also worry about that, because authenticity has to be important in esports. And when we start talking about this, it's a very fine line between telling someone's story and telling a story that is designed to, obfuscate reality, that is designed to make you feel a certain way, that is designed to influence something, that is designed to sell the aspirational element of the league, whatever it might be. And, there was another one as well. There was twins in the league, if I remember rightly. I think they were both FIFA players, and one finished quite low down in the rankings in the final tournament, but got drafted anyway because we built up this whole thing about twin brothers. And imagine what it would be like, when they go to different franchises and they played each other, and they were talking about how the results were always close because they had this like borderline telepathic understanding of each other's gameplay. Well, once we've done that, we've got to have them in the league. So I'm worried about that, and as I said, that fed into those meetings that I was talking about, and it was all a bit fake and contrived. There was incidents where managers made it look like they were conflicted while they were drafting players, but it's pretty much all decided before we actually got to the draft itself, and the press was a big part of that. Now, again, I talked about how teams got broke apart. Fnatic were a good example. Fnatic didn't want to play ball, didn't want to sell their brand that they built, and CGS were really non-cooperative and very mean-spirited to them. And if we look at, like, for example, what might have happened, Jason Lake, the legendary manager, the guy, he was the guy everyone wanted to be a esports manager because of Jason Lake. He made it look cool, it was rock and roll, drinking, being aggressive, passion. It was fantastic. Well, he sold Complexity. They were LA Complexity in the CGS, and he completely sold the brand in exchange for being a GM, and of course a big chunk of change. And when CGS went under, it meant he had to buy back his brand. He had to go to court to get the Complexity brand back. So that's another problem. What happens with the franchising element if this league were to fail, if this league were to suddenly stop? What happens to the endemics that have come into it? I think we all need to know exactly what we're getting into, and I certainly hope people do. I certainly hope that's transparent and publicly known, because if I'd built a brand up and I wanted to be in the Overwatch League, I don't know if I'd want to surrender the entirety of my brand just to do that. And if you think that's something that people might not ask for, when LCS came out, one of the original contract drafts to be an LCS was literally presented to team owners that Riot Games would own your esports organization, its logo, its intellectual property, its history, and that would be in perpetuity moving forward. And of course, that was laughed at. Managers refused to sign it. Owners refused to sign it. Just following on from the coverage thing, it talks about how there will be a dedicated website hub. This was the same with CGS, and what they did, what really made me jaded with CGS was the ruthless nature of how they interacted with the press. If anybody wrote anything negative about CGS, they were excluded from CGS. You would not get access to any player. You would not get access to any owner. You wouldn't get press releases even sent to you. You were literally shut out, and you certainly couldn't attend their events. Absolutely not. Meanwhile, if you were a friendly press publication, they would literally pay for you to go there. They would give you tickets. They would fly you out. When I was working as an independent, before I kind of went into CGS, that you'd go to a CGS event, and if you were one of the friendly press that were basically writing PR, 3 meals brought to you a day, like by runners, take fast food up to the journalists. They'd even come around and say, do you have any preference? Do you want KFC? Do you want McDonald's? And they would. I gained a lot of my weight actually during the CGS because they certainly fucking fed you well. Now that is about controlling coverage. That's about controlling the message when you have a dedicated website hub. And that's going to be the go-to place for all coverage. Now, this means that you can have, obviously, I think certain friendly publications will get access to the players and will be allowed to do video interviews and will be allowed to go on site, but they certainly don't need them. When you create your own coverage hub, you do not need external, or so the thought goes. I mean, you definitely do, but the belief is that once you have something like that, you do not need an external publication, third-party press to help you. And of course, what I'm worried about is this is a huge financial opportunity in esports, and where the old saying, well, fuck the old saying. The point is, where there's money, there will be corruption. Where there's greed, there will be corruption. Esports has proven that to me over my long career, and I'd be a little bit worried that there might not be a publication that could champion a player that was having a tough time, or if something untoward had gone on, who would write about it? Well, if this was the big esports thing, and you would need it to survive, you would need those interviews to drive traffic to your website. It's very difficult if you get pushed out and people refuse to cooperate with you. So CGS certainly did this, and it made me. It makes me nervous when that's presented as a positive. I definitely would much rather that you were just working with third-party press and you took the rough with the smooth. That's my opinion. But again, just to come back to CGS for a moment, literally. They pulled press partnerships. They threatened everybody. They did it with me. They tried to have me fired from my job as a LAN center manager because CGS was in the LAN center that I worked at, and I had to take holiday while CGS was on. That's the level of insanity that esports can get to, where people just want to get their way, and if it's big and people are making money, no one will stand with you. No one will say, "Hey, that's bad. What's happening to Richard?" No one will say that because they want to get paid. And this is one of the problems why sometimes I think things can be too big, and we need to maintain that third-party independent press. So the other thing, they said you can make a name for yourself in third-party events. This is an interesting one to me because the implication there is that the league will not be the be-all and end-all of Overwatch, which is fantastic. I'm from a traditional esports background where we have an open circuit. I think at the moment in Counter-Strike, we're really suffering from oversaturation. And I wish some stops on the tour would disappear. I wish some of the lesser tournaments, some of the tournaments that are clearly in decline, like DreamHack, where DreamHack Winter was a major in 2013, and now it's barely attracting top-level teams here in 2016. I'd rather they just didn't support Counter-Strike at all. I don't really see the benefit. So we are oversaturated, and players are tired and worn out. So I like the idea of an open circuit, provided it's controlled and there's a reasonable amount of stops, and it's not just a free-for-all and constant pressure placed on the players to attend them. So I initially liked the sound of this, but then I thought about, again, CGS and how it worked there. Now, you could attend third-party events if you worked at CGS, but the first problem was you had to, really, because the money that you were getting wasn't enough. If you were a player, if you were an organization taking a cut of prize money, it was in your interest to attend other events. CGS didn't want you to. In the original design plan, you didn't attend third-party events, and then they changed it to you must have express written permission to attend these other events. Now, there was a very famous case at the time. There's a chap called AZN, Kevin AZN Wang, and he played in CGS. He was a 1.6 player, and he went to a small 1.6 LAN, a very small Counter-Strike 1.6 LAN for friends, and he got fined $5,000, which was a big chunk of his salary, for attending this LAN, because A, he didn't ask express permission, and B, had he asked express permission, he wouldn't have got permission, because CGS had gone with Counter-Strike Source, and therefore you were not allowed to play 1.6, talk about 1.6, promote 1.6 while you're working for the CGS. And this also leads on to a political aspect that I'm going to get into. But just first and foremost, when it says make a name for yourself in third-party events, I imagine if you are indeed contracted to Blizzard, those third-party events are going to be only the sanctioned ones. And you might want to play multiple games. You know, you might be a TF2 player that plays Overwatch professionally and is going to be in the Overwatch league, but you might never be allowed to play Team Fortress 2 ever again, even in small lands, because they might not want you to do what they see as promoting another game. And again, I have no idea if that's going to be the case, but if it is, that's also something to be mindful about, you know, and that needs to be clarified. What are the politics going to be in regards to attending these other events? Are people going to be allowed to do it? Are you going to need permission to do it? Are you going to be allowed to play other games? This all has to be clearly defined and publicly known before people start signing up and supporting this. As we, you know, I personally think that's an outrage what happened to Mr. Wang, and his fine of $5,000. I pretty much said so at the time. I think it's a disgrace that he wasn't allowed to just compete at a friendly event, especially, you know, this is a guy who was a pretty well-known player. So the final part is it says that doing all of these things and following that path to pro will increase the odds of receiving an invitation. And this also says that, again, this will be, you know, they're going to be very specific about who's allowed to compete and who isn't. It certainly sounds that way. You have to earn an invitation to be involved. I've had some players from other games that have gone into Overwatch, and they've said it's been very strongly intimated to them by people, you know, in the community, shall we say, that they're not going to be welcome, that they won't be attending this, and they certainly won't be welcome at any official Blizzard events either. And you know, that might be fine. There might be very good reason for that. I don't think that there's entirely you have a right to attend and go and play someone's game. You know, I definitely understand why some developers might not want some people to do that. But once you open the door to basically dictating whether or not people can play, you become kingmakers. And I don't like the idea of, let's say, the best player in the world is a bit of an asshole, you know, and has said some things to a games dev, and they decide they're going to ban him. They decide that, well, that's it, he's never going to play our game. So me, you, all of the fans, we don't get to see the best player in the world. We also don't get to see a developing career. You know, this is something that could really make this person, you know, turn around being an asshole and be more disciplined, and maybe he can meet the right manager and be a mentor, you know. You know, Mike Tyson went off the rails when his original coach passed away and wasn't there to look after him, and he fell in with Don King. You know, this is you want to, you know, I think when you start saying to people, because of your personality, maybe you can't come and play at our table, I think there's going to be a very good reason for that. And I'm a little bit worried that this is going to be something that might be occurring in Overwatch. And I don't want to create the haves and the have-nots in what I believe should be a meritocracy. So that was very much the case at CGS as well. It's very much the case at LCS. Even now, players, you know, hopeful, aspirational players are being emailed, and Riot employees are sending them screen caps of their Twitter feed saying you've got a long way to go before you will ever be considered as a League of Legends player. And it's almost, I feel like, you know, the chicken or the egg has to come first. It's like, once you say to somebody, look, you're good enough to be in, we've been monitoring you, but honestly, you probably, if you want to be part of this league, there's going to be a professional conduct in place. I don't think you should be retroactively applying your professional conduct standards to someone that isn't in your league, if to use that as a justification for not allowing them to be in the league. Seems very circular and unfair to me. So anyway, all things told, while there's potential in the idea, I understand why a lot of old esports veterans will be slightly skeptical and point out to some of the issues. Now, it might be that where CGS, that had $60 million of the Murdoch's money, and massively overspent because they were trying to buy credibility. What it might be here is this might be too big to fail ultimately. This might be a case of when we get all of the big mainstream sports franchises coming in, they might put so much money into this thing that actually it might not matter. It might be able, if there's a problem, might be able to fix it quite quickly. It might be that because of the investment and the types of people that are investing, if there are any bumps in the road, it doesn't matter. We'll stick the course. What happened with CGS was very quickly from its original pilot to the day it shut down, it was about 2.5 years out of a guaranteed 5-year plan that everyone was promised. And the reason that it shut up was that people didn't see the future in it. People saw it swirling down the pan. People saw that the numbers weren't good. People saw that the community hadn't fully engaged, and they just pulled out. They weren't interested in turning it around, despite all of their earlier chest beating about how they were in for the long haul. Now, this here looks like the type of people they're getting involved in. We saw the Serena Williams announcement the other day. All of the people that are getting involved certainly are going to want this to go places. And that might give it the longevity and the status required to maybe get past any initial humps. If you're an Overwatch fan, I imagine you certainly hope that's the case. But certainly as it's presented, I think we need a lot of clarifications just to know that it's not going to make the same mistakes as CGS. And I think on top of that, I think we also need to know exactly what the purpose of the league is by virtue of who's going to be contracted to whom, how the auction's going to work, what's going to happen to the endemic esports organizations. I think when those questions are answered, I'll probably do a follow-up video, and that might make me feel a lot better. Right, so you're going to notice in this segment of the video, I've completely changed clothes, and that's because I recorded it as an afterthought. I did a lot of the comparison, but not a lot of the explanation as to why CGS failed. And I think that's important as well, just to include right at the end of the video. So the first thing is I already talked a little bit about local engagement, and that wasn't really there. And sure, esports was in a very different world in 2007 and 2008. We didn't fill stadiums back then. Hell, I was still attending esports events that were held in like bowling alleys and other very strange venues, shall we say. People were trying to do things on a budget. People held them at land centers, sometimes land centers that they owned. So we weren't filling stadiums. There wasn't that fan engagement. In that sense, you could argue maybe CGS was a little bit ahead of its time in that sense. But I would also say this local engagement thing was never fully realized. I also said it can be a little bit exclusionary. I don't know if I'm right on that. That's kind of my gut feeling. I don't think it was ever fully fleshed out in CGS. So that was one issue. The big issue was authenticity. And let me explain what I mean by that. They came in with this system where everybody had to play a game and all the points scored were added up. So you could be the best Counter-Strike team in the world, but if your Project Gotham Racer or Dead or Alive fighter were terrible, you would just lose all the time, constantly. It made all the disciplines equally weighted. And in fact, actually, I think you could get more points on Dead or Alive than any other game, if I remember the format correctly. So that first, immediately, right off the bat, having to blend all these games together and equally weight them, that doesn't work for an esports fan. The average esports fan pretty much follows one game, maybe two. A lot of people aren't like me. They don't watch all esports. They're not interested in the business of esports. They're not interested in how all the parts of esports interconnect. And maybe that'll change, but certainly back then it wasn't the case. And it was a huge problem for a lot of people. I'm a Counter-Strike fan. Why am I going to watch the other 30 minutes of a broadcast watching games I don't care about just to see if my team's actually won. And then the other thing was they even changed the rules of Counter-Strike, further diluting the authenticity. They took a game which we'd refined, MR12 it used to be, which was very long, very boring, very bloated. It was like MR12 with 2-minute 30 rounds or something. We made it MR15, and then with shorter round times, and then they felt this was too long and perhaps too tactical. So they made it MR9, less rounds, first to 10 wins, nice round number, an audience can understand it. And I don't necessarily mind that, but then with that, they made the decision to give full starting money. So you start with 16K. So very rarely were there ecos, which is where you don't buy to save your money in case you don't follow Counter-Strike. There was no tactical element to money management. It was very rare a team ever got flat broke and couldn't buy up. You had to have a hella run of results against you. And it also led to things that were a little bit unrealistic. Like, for example, some teams on Dust 2 would elect to try and get an early start to buy a bunch of ops at the start and try and tag people crossing mid. So if you were a fan of Counter-Strike, you didn't necessarily like that format either. And this was the key problem, that it isolated a lot of its core audience by not being authentic. And they always said they didn't really care about that. CGS were like, look, we want to try and find that middle ground. But basically what they expected would happen is if we package it for TV and we package it for casuals, we'll hook the casuals in and they'll stick around. The core audience actually was very derisory towards CGS. Like, not a lot of true dyed-in-the-wool esports fans remember it well at all, remember it with fondness. And basically, it was something for the players and the managers and the executives. It wasn't really something for the fans. Now, obviously, this league, Blizzard don't necessarily have that problem because it's their game, it's one game. And I don't really think we're at a stage where everything's been dictated. Like, I certainly think Overwatch needs to iron out some kinks so it becomes more enjoyable to watch, more easier to watch for the casual and somebody who wants to be a fan of Overwatch alike. And that will probably get ironed out over in due course. The other issue with CGS and why it failed was TV ratings, and the ratings were terrible. They always try to dress it up and say, hey, oh, they were super good. It wasn't a ratings issue. It was a ratings issue. I mean, it just didn't have that splash, that impact. And there was some very good reasons for this. I mean, it was never going to get the best slot on TV, but it was certainly, casuals just didn't know what to make of it. You tuned in, it's a championship gaming series. The set design was like more of a game show. It was very weird, they tried. It was, I think, the production company that did it in the UK were the same people that did Robot Wars, and it really had that kind of same feel. It was more game showy than it was like a serious competitive environment, and I understand that, but it just didn't have that vibe. It didn't really, again, impress people, and there was nothing really to hook you in. Like, looking back, some people might think it looks good. I don't think the game was broadcast in a particularly good way either. Just to give you an anecdote from the CGS days, there was a focus group, right, which was literally one dude's wife, one executive's wife, and that focus group was the reason why Counter-Strike was primarily this first-person shooter was primarily broadcast in third person, on the basis it was easier to understand. And as well, I mean, there was just loads of bizarre things. They all had to wear basketball tops because they were trying to obscure the fact that it was terrorists and counter-terrorists. You didn't say the T word, and you certainly didn't talk about bombs or anything like that. It was always the package. And all these things were just very jarring. I don't think people really understood what was going on, even as a casual. Like, why is a guy in a basketball top shooting another guy? What's the package? What the fuck's going on? It was very weird. And also, when it comes to authenticity, this is where I do have some worries about the content. I mean, it was really cheesy. It was really, really cheesy. I think it's a difficult line to walk. Obviously, at E-League, we try and make our content be accessible for casuals on the TV audience, and something that fans like as well. I think the feedback's been generally good, but I understand the challenges. It is a tightrope to walk. But there was some stuff that just was ridiculous. You know, they had players running across rooftops dressed like, 70s cops, or, they had people literally, just kind of almost lying to the camera about how, I mean, shit, you've all seen like American Idol or whatever. And it's like, oh, if I don't get this singing contract, my brother, which is a hybrid twin growing out of my side, will starve to, like, they've all got these insane sob stories. And we really tried to push that into the broadcast and CGS. And there was a few where it's like, if it wasn't for Counter-Strike, I'd be in jail, or I wouldn't have a purpose. And it's like, guys, come on. We're really over egging the pudding here. And, it was the same for the written content. We weren't allowed to do anything that was critical of any of the teams or any of the brands. And this is one area where I think Blizzard might be a little bit doomed to repeat the mistake of CGS. A lot of the stuff is obviously very situational, as you can see from what I'm talking about. But I think this is the one area where I do worry. I think when they talk about editorialized content, that's going to, give people stories, a lot of it's a big turnoff for esports fans. Unless the story is incredibly compelling, you can tell when it's being forced, when it's being synthesized, when your emotions are being played with. And again, the content, while it did have a level of polish that other esports content didn't have at the time, a lot of it was really like, it didn't satisfy the fans. The casuals couldn't engage with it. They didn't care. And it satisfied nobody except really the executive fantasy that if we pushed esports as being something that was saving all these rebellious teenagers and stuff like this, then maybe the mainstream would take a greater interest. And finally, and just ultimately, CGS failed because it spent too much money. And this is something that I think as well we definitely need to watch out for in this Overwatch League. CGS was so desperate to get everybody relevant, or who they believed to be relevant, on board. They were paying insane amounts of money. They were paying money to, people that hadn't commentated Counter-Strike before, and giving them huge exorbitant amounts of money to do so because they believed that they wanted that credible voice associated with the broadcast. They offered all these top players, Heaton was obviously in there, BSL was in there, positions as general managers without really being able to assess what their competence of being a general manager would be like. Because they just wanted them associated in some way with the brand. And all of this came at a huge, huge cost. They were just cutting checks left, right, and center. And as I said, they tanked $60 million in a very, very short space of time. Their operational costs were through the roof. I mean, when some of the financials came out and you were looking at people getting, $250,000 to do a job badly, people were just like, what the fuck? They held events in the Playboy Mansion, and there was just no good reason for that. There was just no good reason for that. And I know from talking to my sources, a lot of people think this Overwatch League is going to, actually generate money, that it's going to be fine. I don't know. Some of those people might be in for a rude awakening. I've heard people talking about how they expect the average slot to go for millions. Some people even talking about $10 million slots. I mean, it's crazy, right? This is for the franchise slots that they expect to see people bid for from these sports franchises. I don't think anyone's going to bid that high, honestly. And even though I know all these big sports stars are coming in, I'm hearing rumors that Mayweather's coming in. We've got Serena Williams now. All these big mainstream. Kobe apparently has been poking around the edges, according to people. So who knows, right? But certainly I don't think it'll go that high. And I think that's going to be the first thing. The financials of this league. This is a mammoth undertaking. This is huge. This is so big, with so much money being thrown at it. That it does make you wonder if where we go if you don't start seeing that immediate return, and what an immediate return would look like. No games developer is just going to pour money into a bottomless pit to keep a league afloat. And if you do, you really need the kind of financing that can only really be propped up, like, for example, like League of Legends. Not only do you have Tencent Holdings, one of the wealthiest companies in the world, underwriting you, you've also got the most popular game in the world, and you're basically getting all those microtransactions from all of the whales that you're pursuing. This creates an environment where you can really run the league and the esports division as a loss leader, which is what it is. Will Overwatch be able to do that? I don't know. And certainly, that's the key thing here, the financials. That was one of the biggest contributors to CGS's demise, and something to be mindful of moving forward. Anyway, look, I know this is a video that's gone on for well over an hour. And I hope you guys have stayed the course and appreciate what I'm trying to say. I'm not writing off the league as doomed to failure. Certainly, I hope that hasn't been the tone of what I'm saying. But it does have an incredible amount of similarities with CGS, and there are certain pitfalls that I think people need to be mindful of. Indeed, I honestly believe that anybody who'd been paying attention in esports for the last 10, 15 years would look at CGS and would go, okay, the great thing CGS contributes is that's the mistake. That's what we don't copy. Those ideas have been proven to not work and not be well accepted by esports aficionados. So let's try something else. So obviously there are concerns, but certainly Blizzard seemed confident. That might be enough for some people. Anyway, there you go. There it is. So I can go back to doing whatever it is I do. You can go back to doing whatever you do. Hope to see more of the Overwatch community, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Take care.